Welcome back to another episode of the Coaching Lab podcast. I'm Lee Baker, your host for today's episode, where I get to sit down with Dr. Michael Arloski. Dr. Arloski is a licensed psychologist, national board certified health and wellness coach, ICF professional certified coach, and the CEO of Real Balance Global Wellness Services. He's been active in the wellness field since the 70s and wrote a book of the foundational text on wellness coaching for lasting lifestyle change, and creating the Wellness Mapping 360 coaching model. So in this episode, we are going to explore tapping into your emotions in coaching. And I also want to take a moment to share an opportunity for you to connect with other coaches. This September 25th through 27th, we're hosting our 8th annual coaching retreat and symposium in Estes Park, Colorado. So be there. And you can learn more at catalystcoachinginstitute.com/retreat. For those in the coaching world, or maybe just dipping their toe into coaching, this conversation is going to be a real treat. Now let's get to it. Michael, I'm so glad you are here joining us at the Coaching Lab podcast, and I'm excited for what we have in store today. So to kick things off, you've had a front row seat of the entire evolution, basically, in the wellness industry, and since the late 70s. So what first drew you to this intersection of psychology and coaching?
Well, I'm sort of one of those guys who was maybe born in the right era or something like that. My son, who's like 50 years old now, he likes to tease me and say, or not tease me, but really he kind of envies me, because he said, God, Dad, I mean, I can't believe your timing. I mean, here you were when you were a little kid, you got to watch baseball with like the legendary stars, and then you go to college right when the whole Cultural Revolution happens. I mean, come on, the best music, the best everything. And, well, fortunately, when I was at college, at university, the thing that really was happening at the same time was the whole human potential movement was really growing and expanding. So as a psychology major, I got turned on to Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Fritz Perls, Virginia Satir, all these people. And I really, had that very kind of personal growth, positive orientation towards psychology. It wasn't just the clinical end of it. I ended up doing, my share of that also, for sure. I did psychotherapy with people for probably 27 years, actually. But I was really lucky because when I was working at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, the vice president for student affairs came back from some meeting of VPs for student affairs and said, oh, this wellness stuff is the next big thing. So we're going to send you and the health center director to what ended up being the first wellness conference in the history of the world.
Wow.
And it was amazing. I got turned on to that so early. And I immediately saw that, as a psychologist, what we're talking about here is, lifestyle behavior. All these behavioral choices people make or are affected by the world around them and how that shows up in their health. So later on, after I got very involved in the wellness field, got very involved in the National Wellness Institute, got presenting there every year, became a board member, became chair of the board for a while, all of that. I got turned on in 1996 to coaching, life coaching. And you got to remember that 1995 was when the ICF was founded. So again, I just happened to find out about that. And almost immediately I saw this connection. Well, in the wellness field, we're trying to help people change their behavior. And it's not a pathological thing. They don't need a therapist to help them change their behavior. But they need somebody that knows how to be an ally, because people try to do stuff by themselves. And, like my good friend, Pat Williams, who's also one of the founders of the ICF, really, he loves to say, if you could have done it by yourself, you probably would have already done it by now.
Clients say that too sometimes.
Yeah. So that's really kind of how that came together. I started, actually training coaches there in the mid to late 1990s. in conferences and workshops and webinars and different companies that would bring me in and so forth. Disease management companies and one thing and another. And then I got involved with the Institute for Life Coach Training and did some classes through them. And before long, I was doing those myself. And then later on, when my wife, Deborah, joined me, that's when Real Balance, health coach training really took off,
Well, I would challenge your son's focus on luck. I don't know if you've peeked at Jim Collins' latest book, but he uses this phrase I was just looking at this morning called return on luck. And I think, my friend, you created return on luck. There were millions of people that lived the same years you lived. There were thousands of people who had the same experience as you. You took that, you ran with it, you impacted lives, you changed the profession. Like, you provided a return on luck. So I'm sorry to your son. Yes, we all have luck. You created a return on that luck. And I love that story.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you. It's interesting getting a recognition. We all need that, right? And, I really appreciate that coming from you, Brad, because I have a lot of respect for you and the work you do in this whole field as well.
Thank you.
How you've helped it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Michael, it sounds like ahead of the curve and seizing opportunity in the coaching field. Yep. And continuing to explore and grow. And you bring up this point of, that changing behavior doesn't require a therapist. However, there are these intersections between behavior change and maybe what we talk about with clients that may dip into therapeutic realm or coaches may perceive as dipping into the therapeutic or therapist realm. So I think we probably start with that question that's on a lot of coaches' minds as we're expanding this field alongside of other systematic approaches in the healthcare system, is where exactly is that line between coaching and therapy?
Yeah. Well, that is such a critical line. And it's one of the most important things that I think someone like myself, who has both a psychology background and a coaching background, can talk about. So, it's a little bit of a jihad of mine, you might say, to get that clarity out there. And as I was one of the founders of the National Board for Health and Wellness Coaching, and I actually did a really great webinar a couple of years ago that we still have on our Real Balance website with a couple of other psychologists talking about staying in the coach lane. Yeah. And what I've found is, we've trained thousands of coaches, is that the vast majority are maybe erring on the side of caution. Okay. They really, really don't want to, go over the line and, do quasi therapy and stuff like that. But every once in a while, we have someone who is fascinated by that stuff, yet did not really pursue it as a career, did not go to graduate school, did not get licensed as a psychologist or a counselor, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe they even kind of fancy themselves as some sort of healer, okay? And every once in a while, we encounter someone like that who really needs to understand this. Because, as you know, and as you can imagine, and as someone who has been there and done that, when you're a therapist that's well-trained, you can go anywhere with anybody. You can go into the deep, dark pit and help them climb back out. When you're not qualified like that, you don't know where you're going and what you're doing when you enter that territory, and you don't know what might happen. I mean, I've hospitalized psychotic break people and suicidal people and ridden in ambulances with, shooting survivors and things like that. So I know how bad things can get. So that really makes it important to me to get the message across that we don't want to go over that line, but yet we want to be able to work with emotions. And that's where things get, that's where things require training and they require understanding. That's what's really important, is for coaches to know that the way to deal with working with emotions is not to totally avoid it, that's going to really take down the quality of the coaching and the potential for what it can do with people. But they have to understand what's the significant difference. So what I have found really is helpful and helps, students that are, learning to coach and coaches that maybe have even been working at it for a while to understand is the difference that I call the difference between resolution and relevance. So when you think about it, therapy is designed to help people resolve conflicts, old wounds of the past, unfinished business, all that kind of stuff, right? And that is some of the most important work a person can do in their lifetime. Now, they do that. People do that in many different ways. You can have an outward bound experience and maybe make tremendous progress on that. You can go backpacking in Europe and maybe learn and grow in all kinds of ways and encounter stuff and learn and change. But you can also do therapy. You can do, the counseling that people may avoid for a long time. They finally roll up their sleeves, get the courage, get the support, and do it. And wow, it works the vast majority of the time. So resolution is about resolving those old wounds. It's about resolving ways of behaving that are maybe dysfunctional, that aren't working for you. They're working against you. Relevance is what we like to talk about here because, sure, everybody's got those old wounds. Everybody wants to, be a candidate for the crappy Childhood of the Year award. I mean, we've all got a history, right? And that stuff can get in the way of us trying to improve our lifestyle. So when it does, we can talk about that with our client in terms of how's it relevant to their wellness plan? How's it relevant to what they're trying to do today to improve their way of living? Okay. So an example that I've got in my book there, Masterful Health and Wellness Coaching, I put this kind of in a scenario in there, even a dialogue, because it's such a common one. Coaches encounter people all the time in health and wellness coaching that have difficulty doing self-care, that have difficulty taking time for themselves, giving themselves permission, right? We encounter that a lot. And one of the things that happens sometimes is people, see a coach, they say, yeah, okay, I'll make an agreement to do that. And then they don't do it and they feel, or they do it, they attempt to do it and they feel guilty while they're doing it. Or they hold themselves back from doing it. Or they're there. Maybe the agreement was, I'm going to finally give myself permission to just socialize and get out with friends and not work all the time. But you're there trying to socialize and your mind is still on the to-do list. Right?
Oh, guilty.
Oh, it sounds familiar.
Many listening probably can resonate with that.
Yep.
Yeah. I think probably all too many people can resonate with that. Yes. So you're in that situation and, what comes up as people start to talk about that is they start to go into maybe their background. Maybe they did have those critical parents. Maybe they did have those folks who, were all about, hard work and that's the only way you survive and all those kinds of messages. Maybe they prevented them from doing anything they wanted to do until they got all their work done, of every possible sort. Maybe they were even harsh. Maybe they were even abusive, et cetera, right? Okay. So you're coaching with somebody, they start talking about all that. Does the coach take the bait and start inquiring about 10 or 20 years ago? And start inquiring about those parents and about how you feel today about those parents and so forth and so on. Now you're over the line.
That's a great distinction. Yes. I love that.
Instead, what you can do is you can acknowledge what that person's been through.
Yeah.
You can empathize. You can validate how they feel about it. All right. You can honor the fact that they went through a heck of a hard time, right? All of that. And then you can say, so how does that get in the way today of you taking time for yourself, for your self-care activities? How does that show up? Now we're under relevance.
Yeah.
And the person's still feeling stuff. They're still dealing with emotions. You're reflecting feeling. You're helping them connect with those feelings, but you're nudging it into the here and now. There was this term that I learned in Gestalt therapy called to presentify.
Say it again.
It is to presentify. Not a legitimate word, but this one we used to bring it into the present. How is it relevant to today? And you can process that and then help the person to help empower the person to make choices based on who they are today, not on who they used to be. So that's an example of how you can take a look at that territory, where that line is, and how you can do that, how you can back away from going, into that territory where you're not sure where it's going to go.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I spelled it out here for everybody's like, what was the word he said? Is that Latin? It's presentify. So like bring it into the present. You're bringing it forward into what is the relevance in your life today. So it's presentify. I love that. I love that.
I love that too. And I mean, it affirms the practice in coaching, right, of present and future versus past, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the distinction, I would say. Sometimes coaches, when someone asks, how are you different than a therapist? I think that example right there is can provide a great picture for someone about how our work can come alongside someone who is in therapy, or how it is different than working with a therapist. I also remember this one example that you had given at the retreat around a lake and like diving, like being into the deep end of a lake versus being on the shore. I think that is also a good analogy on where we wade with clients versus where we might end up in the deep end, which is out of our scope, and then how we get back to shore. And it's presentifying our client back into the moment, which I love.
Yeah, I came up with this metaphor one time called wading into the lake of emotion. And I wrote a blog by that title. And it just really resonated with a lot of coaches, because we talk about, you and your client have an agreement that you're going to go ahead and wade into this lake together. And as you do, it's that nice solid bottom of the lake, that just goes down gradually. And your feet are firmly on that, let's say sandy bottom or whatever it is. And you've got an agreement to go ahead and get wet. And so, as the client feels comfortable, you keep on getting deeper, talking about what really hurts, talking about what they're, experiencing, whatever those emotions are. And you get to that point where, now it's up to the chest, now it's up to the neck. And, you can always back into the shallow water. Okay. Maybe you nudge your client a little bit to, back up into the more shallow water. But now your client wants to go swimming. They want to just dive into this stuff and talk about it. And you don't have an agreement to go swimming. This is the way I put it. You've got an agreement to be a professional wader. Okay. To get wet, maybe up to your neck, all right, but not deeper. That's where you don't have lifeguard or psychologist or counselor training, right?
Yeah. Right.
And this
I like that, yeah.
And the solid bottom is your scope of practice. The solid bottom your feet are on is keeping that in mind, right, and being clear about that. And the agreements you have with your client that this is what we're going to do. Okay. And we can always back off. Yeah.
What I hear there is also expectation in the beginning with your client, like setting yourself up for success as the coach, to then not be in a position where you're maybe feeling uncomfortable. Like you do have to pull yourselves back to shore, and having this shared understanding of where that line is from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What would you say to a new coach who may be nervous about, if a client does bring up emotional things, how to set themselves up for success in that beginning, and then maybe some additional tools around if they are feeling like they're underwater?
Right. Well, you said something really important there, Lee, and that's the agreements you have and the way you build the coaching alliance, how you form that. And part of that is educating the client about how coaching is different than maybe what they've experienced before. I mean, for one thing, almost all of our clients expect us to be consultants. I mean, that's how people, that's what people have experienced most of their lives. You go and have a medical consultation. You have a legal consultation. I go to my mechanic and we have an automotive consultation, right? We rely on their expertise to make recommendations. And so clients expect us to do that too. So we have to kind of educate them about how I'm not going to just do nothing. I'm going to really, be of value to you. And it's real important for coaches to be able to state how we can really help people to take stock of their wellness, create a plan, execute it, develop support and accountability, all the things we do as coaches. Coaches really need to be able to say that easily, smoothly, and in a way where the client's like, I'm okay with that. I was looking for a swimming instructor. Nope. And if you can be clear about that at the beginning with a client, most of the time, you're going to be okay. Now, stuff can happen as you're coaching somebody. I mean, if somebody comes in just, I want to coach with you, and they tell you about these horrific things they're dealing with, well, we know we can make a referral right out of the gate and not coach them. But stuff happens as we're coaching somebody. That's where we have to know how to make a referral, not abandon the person, see them all the way through to the referral. Or like you were saying, Lee, maybe we can coach them while they're seeing a therapist. And then our challenge is not to become therapist number 2. Okay. And I love to say that, to instruct coaches, okay, so if your client starts getting into that more therapeutic territory, that a great response that you can give is like, wow, that sounds really important. Have you talked to your therapist about that? Well, if you talk to your therapist about that, you could really make some progress on that. So don't take the bait. That's the key, But yeah, it's so important to be able to make that distinction, get clear about it, so that agreement is there about how we're going to work together, and that way you can proceed. Yeah.
Well, the thing that came to mind as you were saying the consulting piece is the coach who really understands that. It's almost like there's 3 tiers. There's consultant, there's coach, there's therapist or counselor. The consulting piece in many ways is where AI is stepping into. So if the coach has been depending on providing information, and that's what their coaching practice is built around, they don't have a coaching practice anymore because that is all readily available. The true coach is needed more than they've ever been needed because the information is readily available, and the relevance piece that you're talking about, how does this play a role in my life today, is as important as ever. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, another distinction that I make that's real simple here, but it's very, very important, and wrote a blog on this title also. It's what I call the what, the how, and the why of health and wellness coaching. And what coaches need to understand is that the what people need to do, want to do, that comes not from the coach, unless you have a secondary qualification where you can recommend, okay, here's the exercises you need to do, here's the way you need to be eating. That needs to come not from you, but from a registered dietitian. It needs to come from somebody who's qualified in whatever area it is. We're going to be working with people in the medical field where, they have chronic illnesses and different things. What they need to do is the lifestyle prescription that their treatment team has given them. And they're going to look up the what to do in, health information,
Right.
Health educators, these other resources. And how to do it is the realm of the coach. Because what most people find is, okay, my doctor told me to, get better sleep, drink more water, and eat the Mediterranean diet. Heck, I'm not even Mediterranean. How do I do that in my life? So that's where we work. And also we work with how to help people find their why. What's the motivation that they've got that's going to see them through? But that's an important thing to stay out of, is that what to do territory. When you get into that, what we can help with, and this is something else that I'm very concerned about, is the phenomenal amount of health misinformation that's out there. In fact, there was actually an article in the American Psychological Association's newsletter, The Monitor, a couple of years ago even, on health misinformation and studies that have been done about it. And one of the things that they said that was very alarming, and this goes back to what you were saying, Brad, they were saying that you can't actually completely trust AI information.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's being influenced by bots from foreign countries that are flooding millions of posts of health misinformation. So, you may have AI tell you to never eat broccoli again. I don't know, or something, just because they got overwhelmed with false posts. So that's where coaches need to explore, especially when we hear something suspicious. Oh, tell me more about that. How did you find out about that? What's the source for that? That's also really important. Help educate our clients in how to really separate the wheat from the chaff.
I hope everybody wrote that down. What's the source for that? What's the source for that? Because as you're saying, the bots are influencing it, but so are the YouTube video people that are just trying to grab a headline or the X posters or whatever.
Right.
What is your source for that, folks, is a critical question. So, yes.
Oh, absolutely. What's maybe the secondary motivation going on here?
Yeah, follow the money.
Or primary motivation for them, actually. Yeah. What do they gain by you, swilling whatever kind of snake oil that they are actually recommending?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have found too with clients though that there's almost, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Michael, but there's a sense of too much noise right now when it comes to information. So even in a session, I think like our ability to connect with someone and build rapport on that emotional level comes from like this affirmation of there's so much noise and overwhelm that they're taking in all of this information. And our role is not to dictate what kind of information that they're taking in and what they do, but how they are intaking, like processing that, deciphering like what is important to them moving forward and how we can support them as they continue their journey. But I hear that all the time. Food noise, health education noise. And they come and they're almost at wit's end of like, Lee, I've just been told in the last week I need to run more, but I don't need to run. I can't run this many miles, or I need to walk 10,000 steps. But if I walk 10,000 steps and my joints are going to hurt, what do I do?
Right.
And my two things are usually affirming, that sounds like a lot of overwhelming information to take in. And out of all that information, what's rising to the top for you? What feels most important to you? Why, or what was important to you about exploring these things in the first place? And then that moves us into the present and the future versus this overwhelm. And that's emotions, right? Regulating that and helping people find clarity.
Absolutely. Now, overwhelm is a really common emotion, to say the least, especially today. Yeah, as you're talking about that, it reminds me of a student of ours who's one of the best students that's come along in quite a while here. And she had narrowed down her eating, her diet to, like this incredibly restricted zone where, no, I can't eat that because there's this article that says you can't do this. And I can't eat that because of, this thing that I read online. And, and she, what was really cool, she told me she went to see an actual registered dietitian, and she's exploring with her, and the registered dietitian was doing a great job asking her, what all she's eating and so forth. And she was mentioning about what she didn't eat and how she'd eliminated that. And the RD was just saying, well, why do you do that? And then she started to find out that, oh, well, the reason I don't, use those kind of oils anymore is, the reason, you've heard is this, but that's actually information that was put out by the people that produce this kind of oil, and they want to sell their oil instead of the oil, that you're using. It was just a whole bunch of that.
Yeah.
And what she started to realize, it was this tremendous relief that, oh, I'm not this person with all these food restrictions and allergies and sensitivities. I'm actually kind of normal. That was very, very heartening for her to hear. Yeah.
That brings us back to something that Brad and I have talked about before, where it's kind of like, I think coaching offers this opportunity to reconnect with ourselves and our awareness around our wants, desires, and vision for our future, right? And when there's so much going on, we get disconnected from that. And so I think a coach has that opportunity to create that space for someone to reconnect with themselves and their journey and their health. And through, I think, in my opinion, and when we're talking about with emotions, is that if we steer clear of all these feelings that someone has around their life and their journey and what they should or should not be doing, and we just kind of skirt past that because we're afraid of going into a therapy realm, we miss that rapport that we build with the client as part of their process towards change.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious your thoughts on that. How to encourage coaches to tap into those rapport building and relational type conversations or affirmations and questions in a confident way without feeling like they are stepping into a different lane.
Well, building that coaching alliance, there's I talk about, there's the how to be and there's the what to do. And the how to be part is foundational. This is cranking it all the way back, to the Stone Age when Carl Rogers was talking about things, and he was talking about unconditional positive regard, being non-judgmental. He's talking about empathic understanding, talking about warmth and genuineness. He called them the facilitative conditions of therapy. And I think they're the facilitative conditions of coaching as well. And to me, that is coaching presence. And your coaching presence, your way of being with somebody carries the day more than all the techniques that you've learned and forgotten or have a hard time remembering or anything else. Your way of being is foundational, and it gives your client permission to explore, to feel safe, to trust or not. All you have to do is be a little critical about somebody's way of living and be a little judgmental, even in a slight way. And, that coaching alliance is starting to, pull back. So, that way of being is huge right there to begin with. And then it's about inquiring. Think about it in your own life. Think about your group of friends. And I'll be honest, I've got a great bunch of friends. Only some of them inquire very much about me. Sound familiar?
Absolutely.
And as soon as you mention something, they're off on their own experience with it, right? And there is that, chiming in, there's that affirming by, sharing your own experience with it. But then they don't come back to you. And see, coaches are, what we're trained to do is to keep that client in the lead. So we're inquiring about their life, and we're taking that positive psychology, strength-based approach to it. It's not our mindset, is the beginning of all of it. Are we still in the what's wrong and how can we fix it mindset with somebody, the consultant mindset? Or are we into that growth mindset, into that mindset that's wanting to inquire, wanting to find out more? that's asking not what's wrong and how can we fix it, but it is asking what's possible, what could be.
Mm.
Right?
I want to go back. I want to go back to what you said about how friends like rarely inquire about you, and how sometimes when they will, and they'll use their own experience. And it made me think about sometimes coaches ask about when is that appropriate, and if that's appropriate to bring up a part of their own experience. If it's something that the client brings up that they resonate with, is that appropriate? Is that something that they dive into? And I feel like there's so much nuance around that it would be good to unpack that a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I love talking about self-disclosure. It's a really important topic for coaches to understand. What's really interesting, I came across some research on that said when coaches don't disclose very much at all about themselves, they're not trusted as much. But yet when they disclose way too much, they're thought to be incompetent.
It's a fine line.
Yeah. It's like, oh, well, here's how I lost weight and I did this and that and blah, blah, blah. It's like, am I talking to a professional or just somebody here in a coffee shop, you know? Yeah. But yeah, self-disclosure and how to do it appropriately and, you know, and even powerfully can be really helpful in coaching. Just briefly, the way that I think it is done effectively is when you resonate with something the person's talking about or you share something. Well, first of all, there's 3 different levels of self-disclosure. One is you're just disclosing something right here, right now. This may be a reaction you have to what's going on. Okay. Like, oh, you know, what you just said, Lee, really touched me. You know, it's a self-disclosure, but it's just right here, right now. That's one form. The other is, you know, personal information. How much do I share about myself? Do I let them know that I'm a grandfather? Do I let them know that I like to go, you know, swing dancing? You know, that kind of thing. And how much of that do I share or not? Some coaches are a little concerned about that. Part of it is making the distinction with who are you working with? Okay. So if I'm a psychologist working in a prison setting, I'm not just going to disclose a whole lot about myself. Okay. Or, you know, that kind of thing. You see what I mean? But the vast majority of people we're working with, you know, we don't have to be as close to the vest. And when we don't disclose anything like that, we remain kind of this faceless, you know, impersonal kind of experience. And so how does the client connect with that? So sharing some of that, you know, to the degree you're comfortable, you're the one that sets the boundaries as a coach, as a person, that's fine. You know, put your own boundaries there. But the third type of self-disclosure are maybe shared experiences or common experiences that you can relate to. And the key there is to not expect that your experience is going to be just like their experience. Okay. Or that their experience is just like yours. So, for example, if anybody's read my first book, you know that back in 2006, my mitral valve let go and I ended up having open heart surgery. So if I've got a client that's going to be going through open heart surgery, am I going to share that? Yeah, I probably will. Okay. But the way you share anything about yourself is to share it, have a rationale for sharing it, a purpose that, you know, is behind sharing. Maybe you want to deepen the relationship. You want to, you know, normalize something with somebody, whatever it might be. But then share it, make it brief and to the point, and then real quickly get the spotlight back on your client. How did that sound to them? How do they relate to what I just said? You know, put the spotlight back on them. And that way, self-disclosure can be a great tool that a coach can work with. Mm-hmm.
The key is not then taking over the conversation. That it doesn't become about the coach. It stays in the client centered.
You're setting the stage. You're not taking the stage.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yep. Yeah. You want to get the spotlight back on your client and maybe ask a really great question about it, that it kind of relates back more to them rather than your experience. Like let's take the open heart surgery, for example. And I might share about, the level of concern I had going into it. And then I might inquire about, after I, make my self-disclosure, I might, just say to the client, so tell me some of the concerns you've got about heading into this, and then they can feel like, okay, this person knows what I'm talking about. They know what I'm up against. Maybe I can go ahead and tell them how scared I am, or how, whatever, concerns or faith I have in the whole thing or what. That can, really make a really good entryway into what needs to be explored.
So when we're talking about emotions and like self-disclosures around, some things that we've given examples around are maybe sensitive topics or sensitive things that a client is navigating. What role would you say a coach's emotional regulation plays in going into that conversation and their presence around that, or their responsibility to regulate how they navigate a conversation that may be potentially sensitive?
Sure. Well, one thing about that, as you were saying this, the thing that occurred to me before you talked about the emotional self-regulation, and I do want to get to that, of course. But when you're with a client and they're bringing up a really tender territory, maybe just they're kind of briefly touching on it, don't just barge right in. Ask permission to go there. And one phrase that I use a lot is, so would it be of value to you for us to talk more about this? Would it be of value to you?
I like that.
Are they willing to, does it feel like it's going to be worth it to talk about this? And if the trust is there, they may go ahead. Now, if you have only begun coaching, you haven't seen them more than one or two times, the trust isn't there yet, they may say, no, I'm going to back off of this now. That's okay. That's fine. We want to have that trust there before we, go there. But having that asking permission, that really allows things to go better. And the clients really appreciate that kind of honoring of, how sensitive something might be to them. And remember, something can be like a no big deal thing to you, but it might be a really big deal thing to them.
Yeah.
So we always want to be tuned into that too.
I like that you circled us back there, because I was remembering that, some of the coaches that have gone through our program, they do talk about if a client brings something up that kind of is like how they describe maybe out of left field, like something just like heavy comes into the conversation. It is this moment of, do you acknowledge it? Do you move past it? And sometimes they move past it, then we debrief, about it. And we talk through that about acknowledgement and asking that. And I like that you bring up asking permission to go there, because if we just don't acknowledge it at all, or we just burst in wide open into the conversation, both of those avenues seem to have a maybe more negative impact on the session. And so I think I like the idea of asking that permission in a way that, and also acknowledging that those emotions, you're hearing that from the client too, versus just pretending like it's not there.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side of it, the coach's own self-regulation around emotions is really important. And one of the things that I think we have to understand as coaches is that our clients, you remember old Fritz Perls? He used to say that I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations. You're not in this world to live up to mine. I am I and you are you. And if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. Well, A lot of posters cut off that last line, but but what he's saying there is and what coaches need to remember is your client is not there to live up to your expectations. They're going to say stuff that's going to rub you the wrong way. Somebody will at some point. They're going to have values that totally conflict with yours. They're going to say offensive things. And quite frankly, we need to get past that because we're not taking it personal. It's not like, okay, I'm trying to make a friendship with this person and they say something offensive. Well, maybe that's a disqualifier for a friend. Maybe they've got values that are like, I don't need to be around that stuff. That's fine. But we're a professional. We're like a doctor, in a MD in an office, and somebody comes in and they're bleeding and they're swearing like a sailor. Well, so what? You work with the blood. All right. So likewise, there's going to be that, but there's also going to be your own unfinished business, your own tender territory. And that might look like some stuff you've been avoiding working on that maybe you do need to work on to get past, or it can be maybe something that, hey, happens to everybody. Maybe you've got a client that walks right in and presents exactly what you're up against right now in your life. Maybe you had somebody in your family that you loved and was really close to die last week, and in walks your client and says, boy, I had somebody that I really loved that died last week. Whew. What happens to you? Okay. Do you just clam up? Do you steer it around? Do you start talking about, well, let's do some goal setting? It's okay to acknowledge that you might have something that is too tender for you right now. Or maybe you just, had your divorce finalized, in the last certain, short amount of time. And in comes your client and they're right in the middle of the whole thing or something similar. It's okay to, say to your client, I've been dealing with something really similar in my life right now. And I'd like to see if it's okay with you, if that's a topic that we can shelve for a while and put aside for a while, maybe process later on when we're working together. It's okay to do that. It's okay to call, sort of time out in the ball game and say, let's deal with that later on, or help them find a resource they need. Who else do you have to talk to about that right now? That kind of thing. That's okay too.
I have a question around that because as you're talking about that, in the back of my mind, I'm like, coaches are thinking, but we have to stay client-centered. So if the client brings up this topic that includes death in the family or stress management around that, and it also hits so close to home for us, it's our responsibility to stay client-centered with them. How do we manage that with confidence in almost taking that topic off the table? It sounds like, and maybe, reintroducing it in a future session. But I am curious around how to, in the moment, like make that distinction when you kind of been told this is the lane we go in, right? Not our lane.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. No, great question. I think really it's about how does it really hit you? Are you capable of emotional self-regulation where you're able to really put your own stuff aside, be right there for the client, and I think in more dire emergency like situations, it's easier to do that. I don't know about you, but maybe you've been in the kind of situation where you're the first responder to some accident or something, and you just take your own stuff and you put it aside and you just deal with it right then and there. Okay. So, that's almost easier. But when it's in that kind of in-between zone, where it's not that much of an emergency, but yet it's something really important to your client, we want to really acknowledge that. We want to empathize with that client. But then we have to kind of consider, if I'm going to be client-centered, it means I got to really be here for that client. And that means I want to be here with this client without one or two of my arms tied behind my back. So I want to be able to be really present and really, give that client my full ability. And if I'm not able to, maybe we need to reschedule. Maybe we need to, it's kind of like if you had a migraine headache that came on, right before your client's ready to call or, check in, you would postpone the appointment, right?
I mean, it sounds to me like the answer is in the wording that you're reminding us of. It's not client aware, it's client centered. If you cannot be centered, that's a sign to step back, either from the topic or from the actual appointment. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Being centered is
a big word.
That is the name of the game in coaching. Yeah. I mean, it really is. I've got the second, or about the third chapter in my book, Masterful Health and Wellness Coaching. I actually talk about the whole concept of being centered. I talk about applying principles of Taoism, the philosophy, not the religion, to our coaching and how it really works. How we can, move with things, not in opposition to them.
Be the water.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yep. Stand like a mountain, flow like water.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That brings me to my next question on coaches who we've talked about a little bit around this nervousness or feeling like we're underqualified to navigate these tough moments or emotions or management in this session. So what offerings would you give to a coach to build their confidence in this area of emotional regulation or building that rapport through emotional management in your sessions? You mentioned your book, but I'm curious what else you'd offer.
Well, so much of it just truly comes from experience. And realize that, you're not going to be, top-notch, best coach you're ever going to be right at the beginning of your coaching. You're going to gain wisdom. You're going to gain from your experience. And what's maybe ideal is if you can process some of that through continued training, through mentoring, or supervision if you've got a good supervisor in a work setting, all of that kind of thing. That's really essential. And to just process it, you can talk about a client if you are completely anonymous about the client, the nature of the client. You can maintain confidentiality. But, that self-doubt is a natural thing. And the more you allow yourself to experiment and, continue to practice, and the more you see the results from your coaching and you see people changing, you see people growing, it builds and builds. I think the other thing is to remember, for one thing, I think one of the things that really hurts beginning coaches' confidence is their expectation they put on themselves that I have to come up with these great questions all the time. And they rely way too much on questions. All right. And they forget about all those active listening skills. Right. When I was at the Health and Wellbeing Coaching Conference a couple of years ago, which I'm going to be presenting at again this fall, Bill Miller was one of the keynote speakers there, and he talked about the balance between questions and active listening skills. And he said, because I used to teach, well, you should at least have a 50-50, right? And he said, you should be doing 2 or 3 active listening skills for every question. And you know what? Those are flat out easier than questions. And I always say to students, remember, here's a little secret. Don't tell anybody. When you have no idea on God's green earth what to say or do, just simply say, Oh, tell me more about that. The good old request for clarification. And the person elaborates. Yeah. Yeah. So, take the pressure off yourself. Remember that you are facilitating their work. You're not that consultant that has to come up with the excellent recommendations. You're a facilitator rather than this person who is making all these things happen.
I have a rabbit trails question maybe that you brought up earlier around experience. And what came up in my mind was this pressure sometimes for coaches to have a certain specialty in coaching. And when we've been talking about experience, like I wonder what your thoughts are on specialized coaching versus like getting experience in coaching in a variety of quote unquote specialties or settings or people in order to build that, like I would say, experience with emotional regulation and understanding our whole population. Like, I don't know. I was just thinking about this pressure to specialize and be very specific with one area versus experience in different areas and then honing in or what your thoughts are on actual experience, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, one aspect of the pressure is from the outside, what you hear around you, but also a lot of people have that pressure themselves because maybe they really are aspiring or dedicating their lives to working in a particular territory. Maybe they had a parent that died of diabetes and they really want to specialize in working in that area. That's wonderful. Or maybe people who went through the experience you went through growing up and the same hard times or whatever. That's terrific. But on the way there, please first of all, coach the widest variety of people you can possibly imagine. Every demographic you can think of, age, socioeconomic background, race, ethnicity, on and on and on. Just coach the widest variety possible because they're going to be your best teachers and you're going to learn so much from them. Especially, if you're there when they're inquiring, you're not trying to analyze their life and make recommendations. You're asking them to tell you more about themselves, right? Which is helping them elaborate and explore themselves. So, the specialties are there, but I think the first thing that coaches need to do, sure, eventually you can get a certificate in any one of a whole, 100 different things, right? There's plenty of those out there that are being offered, all kinds of things from, really important stuff down to some pretty esoteric stuff, as we know. But my words to everybody is just learn to be a better coach. Just get better at coaching, and how you do it. That is such a deep thing that you're going to be learning that forever. I'm still learning stuff all the time,
I remember when I first jumped into triathlons, I was reading I don't remember, one of the triathlete magazines, and someone wrote in with these detailed questions about, I'm doing my first Ironman, and should I do this with my lactate and my power meter? And no. And the person that was doing the column, a former professional triathlete, he basically said, here's what you need to do. You need to swim a lot, you need to bike a lot, and you need to run a lot. Then once you've done this a couple times, then we'll worry about lactate and VO2 max and power meters and all that. And I've never, that was probably, 20 years ago. And I've never forgotten. Swim a lot, bike a lot, and run a lot. Then we'll worry about the details. So I think you're kind of saying the same thing. Let's learn this.
Yeah. Build the foundation. And then if you've got a passion for a certain subspecialty, I was just curious because I hear that from coaches a lot of like, should I choose this, niche population because I feel like that's what I have to do, but I also want experience with like a broader population of people. And so I was that was my self-disclosed question there to ask inquiring minds. But Michael, thanks so much for joining us in the podcast today. Any final, I know you've got a lot of words of wisdom, any final words of wisdom, ways people can get in touch with you?
Wait, I've got one for him first before we let him go into words of wisdom. I want to know, Michael, what is one area in your own life that you're tweaking right now, that you're continuing to grow, that you're continuing to stretch yourself? You are looked at in our world and beyond that as the guy. Like, you know this stuff. You've been there from the beginning. You've helped us all move the pathway forward. How about in your life? What's an area that you're stretching, growing, leaning into that people might not expect?
Wow. What a great question. And, actually your question is causing me to just feel the need to identify what that would be in my own life. Because I think I've just recently, I'm in the process right now, in fact, of finishing up like the very last pages of the manuscript of the third edition of Wellness Coaching for Lasting Lifestyle Change. So we're going to finally get a new edition out this year of that book. So I've been, pretty preoccupied with that.
For sure.
To say the least. And, I think two things come to mind. One is the fact that, nothing lasts forever. Impermanence is quite real. And, I'm interested in, being healthy and well, as I age, and what does it take to do that?
Yeah.
And it's given me an understanding, kind of like, Lee was saying in one of her examples earlier, somebody's there saying, I should do 10,000 steps, but when I do, I feel this way, and that's something that I think coaches have to really take into account is, what's the experience from the other side of the Zoom call or the, coffee table at the coffee shop or whatever, what's it like for that person? In terms of my own words of wisdom about coaching, I would say that, the whole thing we talked about being centered is so important, but so is just you allowing yourself to be yourself, to let that come through, to let leanness come through in all the coaching you do, to let Bradness come through. And because, when you're doing that, you're going to be doing your best coaching. And it's your own style. Like I contrast sometimes me and my dear friend, Pat Williams, who's another totally incredible, master coach and everything. And we both do good coaching, but we do it differently. In the introversion extroversion scale, I'm right dead center in the middle. I can keynote an international conference and I can go be by myself in the woods and really enjoy it. Okay. Pat, he's really an extrovert. So he's going to be a lot more active. Okay. He's going to have a different pace in the way that he coaches somebody. Not frenetic, he's also really able to be centered and grounded as well. And, be patient to let that thing emerge from the client, what needs to emerge. But allow yourself to let who you are come through. Don't try to be like Brad or Lee or me or Fritz Perls or, some therapist or some coach you saw on YouTube. Let yourself come through. And a way to get a hold of me, michael@realbalance.com. And take a look at realbalance.com for all of our stuff. And there's also not just, what we're offering for classes and things, but there's a deep, deep, deep resource of, archived free monthly webinars that we've done, all kinds of information for
You
coaches.
mentioned your blog, and they can get that there as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We appreciate you so much. And I know I speak to a lot of coaches that will hopefully be listening to this episode that, man, this is a good conversation. Lots of good information. So thank you.
Well, hey, it's just been a lot of fun talking with you too. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Michael Arloski. If you found this episode valuable, we'd love for you to share it with a fellow coach or leave a review. It helps us continue bringing these conversations to you. And as always, thank you for being part of the Coaching Lab and Catalyst community. We'll see you in the next episode, or if you want to connect sooner or have a topic you'd like to discuss, please reach out at results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com.